Hello, welcome to the Learn English Lab. This is the deep dive, your shortcut to being well-informed. Today, we're embarking on a deep dive into a topic that's, well, it's not only fundamental to just about everyone's life learning, growing, but it's also super critical if you're tackling major English tests, especially something like the IELTS. We're talking about education and student life.
That's right. It's a huge area and incredibly relevant. I mean, it touches everyone, doesn't it? Whether you're a student now or thinking back to your school days, maybe you're a parent involved in your kids' education. Exploring this isn't just an academic thing. It helps us understand how societies work, how people develop, the different ways people gain knowledge and skills. It's quite revealing.
Exactly. And for you listening, particularly if demonstrating your English skills in a formal setting like IELTS is your goal, then really getting to grips with this subject is, well, essential. It's about being able to talk about complex stuff challenges, different systems around the world with confidence, with the right words. So our mission today is to really dive deep. We want to unpack the core ideas, the common hurdles, the global perspectives on education and student life. We'll use the insights we have to equip you. We want you to walk away with the specific vocabulary, relevant examples, the kind of analytical thinking you need to feel ready, whether it's an essay, a speaking prompt, or understanding a reading or listening passage.
Yeah, think of it as building your toolkit, getting the vocabulary down, but also getting a more nuanced view. Because education isn't just one thing, is it? It's complex, it's always changing, and it looks very different depending on where you are. Understanding these layers, these structures and philosophies is not just test prep. It really gives you a richer appreciation for this massive part of life.
Agreed. So let's start with the basics, maybe. The architecture of these learning systems. Because understanding how education is actually structured feels like the right place to begin.
Definitely. And the first big point is, these systems are really not the same everywhere. Not at all. They reflect deliberate choices countries make about their culture, their economy, their social priorities. Recognizing these differences in structure is a fundamental context.
Right. So typically the journey kicks off with primary and secondary education. This is the foundation stage for most people, covering, say, ages 5 up to about 18. Primary school for the younger ones, maybe 5 to 11-ish. That's all about building those absolute bedrock skills: literacy, reading and writing, numeracy, getting comfortable with numbers, maths, and starting to spark that initial critical thinking. Core subjects are pretty universal here, aren't they? Languages, maths, some basic science, social studies, that sort of thing. But how kids move through these years, the milestones, that can vary a lot.
Precisely. Let's look at some examples. The UK system, for instance, it organizes the primary years into key stages. Key stage 1, key stage 2. Then students move into secondary, and around age 16, they hit these major public exams, like the GCSEs. That's a big checkpoint.
Okay.
Compare that to the US system. It often follows a path like elementary school, then middle school, and then a 4-year high school program, usually ending with a diploma. Secondary education, say 12 to 18, that's where the curriculum usually gets broader. You build on the foundations, but you also start preparing students more directly for what's next, higher ed, or maybe joining the workforce.
And that preparation for what comes next, that's where you see some really interesting differences emerge, even within secondary school itself. Germany is a great example here, isn't it? Students might get channeled into different tracks relatively early on.
That's right. You have the gymnasium track, which is very academic, really geared towards getting students ready for university. But then you also have more vocational tracks. These focus much more on practical skills, preparing students directly for trades or technical careers.
So that structure itself reflects different societal ideas about what secondary school is for, right? Is the main goal university prep for everyone, or is it about providing several different but equally valued paths?
Exactly. And understanding these structural comparisons is gold for assessments. Imagine an IELTS writing task 2 asking you to compare the pros and cons of early specialization versus a system where everyone follows a more similar path for longer. To answer that well, you need to know how these systems actually work. You could, for instance, contrast a system like Japan's, often seen as very rigorous, exam-driven, leading to high scores but maybe also high stress, with Finland's system, which gets a lot of praise for being more student-centered. It values teacher autonomy and defines learning more broadly than just test results.
That's a really stark contrast, and yeah, perfect for analysis. You'd want to use specific terms there. Things like curriculum, standardized testing, the underlying pedagogical approach, the method of teaching. And comparing them, you'd use connecting words like whereas or in contrast. So you might say something like, Japan's focus on standardized testing drives high academic results, whereas Finland's more flexible curriculum and different pedagogical approach perhaps prioritizes holistic development and maybe reduces student pressure.
And this vocabulary isn't just for writing.
Yeah.
In the speaking test, if you're asked about your own education, using terms like your formative years for primary school, or describing your country's overall educational framework, it just adds a layer of precision. It shows you can think about education structurally, not just personally.
It really does elevate how you talk about it. Maybe take a second now, if you're listening. Think about your own primary and secondary school. How would you describe its structure using some of these words? What were the main stages, the key subjects?
Good exercise.
Yeah.
Okay, so moving beyond secondary school. For many people, the next big step is higher education. This is the realm of universities, colleges, specialized professional institutes. Here, students pursue degrees, bachelor's, master's, doctorates, going much deeper into specific fields: engineering, medicine, law, humanities, arts, the whole spectrum.
And universities, they're centers of advanced learning specialization, but they also bring a major global challenge, particularly around cost. The rising price tag of tuition fees and just the general cost of living for students is a massive barrier for so many people. You see these figures. Some private universities in the US, tuition alone can be over $50,000 a year, and that's before rent, books, food.
It's a huge hurdle, and it directly impacts access to education and equity. On the flip side, you have countries like Germany. They have a policy of offering higher education essentially for free or at very low cost, even for international students. Now, that's not just generosity, it's partly a strategy, right? To attract global talent, fill skilled jobs. But this big difference in funding models really highlights different societal views. Is education a private investment you pay for, or a public good the state supports?
In this whole debate, cost access funding comes up constantly in assessments.
Yeah.
You might get a reading passage analyzing university enrollment trends or different funding models. You'd need to pick out data, understand different viewpoints. Listening tasks could easily involve students talking about applying for financial aid, understanding loan terms, or remembering scholarship deadlines. It's everywhere.
And it's a classic writing task 2 essay topic. Something like, should higher education be free for all? To tackle that effectively, you need a balanced argument. You absolutely discuss the benefits, promoting equal opportunities, breaking down socioeconomic barriers, maybe creating a more skilled workforce for the economy. But you also have to grapple with the challenges, the huge cost to the government, potential worries about maintaining quality if resources are stretched thin, maybe even the argument that making it free could devalue it somehow.
This is where that specific vocabulary is crucial. Words like tuition fees, access to education, socioeconomic barriers, subsidizing education. Your conclusion could offer a more nuanced view, maybe suggesting tiered systems free or heavily subsidized for lower income students, or perhaps exploring other innovative funding ideas beyond just full state funding or high fees.
Exactly. Showing you understand those different angles is key. And in speaking, if you're asked about a memorable university experience, maybe describe a challenging research project. You could use terms like academic rigor, mention how important the campus facilities like labs or libraries were, and explain how the whole thing broadened your perspective on your subject.
Absolutely. Using the right language captures the specific nature of that higher ed experience. Now, it's also really important to remember that the path after secondary school isn't always university. Vocational training, apprenticeships, and increasingly, online learning. These are super important alternatives.
Precisely. These routes often have a strong focus on practical, hands-on skills that are directly applicable to specific jobs. Think electricians, plumbers, IT support technicians, nursing assistants, chefs. Some countries have really strong systems to this. Australia's TAFE institutes, for example, offer a huge range of vocational courses that are really well regarded by employers.
And the rise of online platforms, Coursera, edX, specialist skill platforms, has just blown open access to learning, hasn't it? You can pick up new skills, get certifications, even do full degrees online, often with a flexibility traditional places can't match. The pandemic really highlighted this, but the trend was already strong.
Definitely. And you could easily encounter these alternatives in the tests. A listening task might feature 2 people debating whether to go to university or do an apprenticeship, weighing up the pros and cons.
Or a writing task 2 could ask you to compare the value of vocational versus academic education in today's job market.
Yeah, and you'd need to discuss things like immediate employability and the hands-on training from vocational routes versus maybe the broader career options or long-term adaptability that an academic degree might offer.
You'd be using terms like career-oriented skills, skill acquisition, practical expertise, industry-relevant training.
Quick tip for writing task 1, too. If you get a chart showing, say, employment rates for academic versus vocational grads, being able to summarize that data using phrases like graduates with practical expertise showed higher initial employability is really effective.
It really drives home that there are multiple valid pathways to success and contribution, and understanding how different societies value these pathways is key.
Absolutely. So we've looked at the structures. Now let's shift focus a bit and get into the actual experience of being a student. Because, let's face it, it's not always smooth sailing. Student life involves navigating some significant hurdles: academic, financial, social, emotional. And these challenges, they're very common topics in assessments, often requiring you to analyze causes, effects, and possible solutions.
Let's start with one that feels almost universal these days: academic pressure. The competition seems intense everywhere for grades, for university places. It's often driven by those high-stakes exams, parental expectations, maybe just a societal focus on academic achievement above all else. Plus, the sheer academic workload can be immense.
A really stark example often cited is South Korea. The pressure there is famously intense. Many students attend Hagwon. These are private after-school academies, often running late into the night, drilling for exams. This kind of relentless schedule, the constant focus on scores, it can unfortunately lead to really high levels of stress, anxiety, even burnout among young people.
That example paints a vivid picture, and it's exactly the kind of thing you might read about or hear discussed in a test. Or it could be a direct writing task 2 question, right? Like, what are the main causes of rising academic pressure on students today, and what can schools or governments do to address it?
Exactly. In an essay like that, you'd unpack the causes, the weed of those high-stakes exams, maybe a cultural emphasis linking grades to future success, perhaps curricula that are overloaded or inflexible. And for solutions, you could talk about embedding more mental health support within schools, maybe reforming assessment methods towards more holistic assessment, looking beyond just exam results to things like creativity or collaboration, or promoting a better work-life balance through encouraging extracurriculars.
Vocabulary like exam stress, academic workload, burnout, mental health support, holistic assessment is essential there. And in speaking, if asked how students cope with pressure in your country, you could mention study groups, peer support, maybe counseling services, perhaps adding your own view that more focus on mental health is needed.
Then there are the financial roadblocks. We touched on this with higher ed costs, but it's a major source of anxiety. Think about international students in the UK facing fees of £20,000, £25,000 a year, maybe more. Plus the high cost of living in cities like London, it's enormous pressure.
Which often means students rely heavily on scholarships if they can get them, or take out substantial student loans, leading to long-term student debt. Or they juggle studies with part-time jobs. Now, working part-time can teach responsibility, budgeting, sure, but it definitely cuts into study time and can impact academic focus. It's a trade-off.
You'll definitely see these financial themes pop up. Listening tasks about applying for financial aid or grants. Reading passages analyzing the impact of student debt or trends in the cost of living. You need to be able to pull out facts, figures, and opinions.
And coming back to that big writing task 2 question, should governments fully fund higher education? It forces you to weigh up that ideal of accessibility for everyone against the very real fiscal responsibility governments have. They have limited budget constraints, right? They need to balance education funding with healthcare, infrastructure, everything else.
Precisely. Using terms like financial aid, student debt, cost of living, budget constraints, socioeconomic barriers helps you articulate that complex balancing act. You can show you understand the tension between the desire for universal access and the practical financial implications.
Okay, so beyond the books and the budget, there are the social and emotional adjustments. These are huge, especially when students move to a new place, leaving home, maybe moving to a different country entirely.
Oh, absolutely. Homesickness is very common. And then there are the challenges of navigating cultural differences, maybe language barriers, even if you're academically proficient. Imagine a student, say, from China, studying in the US. Their academic English might be excellent, but they could struggle with slang, fast informal conversation, or just understanding unspoken social rules. This can make social integration really difficult initially.
And that's a perfect topic for speaking part 3, isn't it? Questions like, how can universities better support international students? You could suggest things like better orientation programs that go beyond just academics, maybe language workshops focused on conversational fluency, promoting cultural clubs, setting up peer support systems.
And sharing a brief, relatable story can be powerful in speaking. Maybe describe someone you know experiencing cultural shock when they first went abroad, feeling isolated, but then finding their footing by joining a sports team or a society. It shows resilience and overcoming adaptation challenges.
Yeah, that really brings terms like cultural shock, social integration, peer support, and adaptation challenges to life.
And kind of underlying all these specific challenges is that fundamental one, time management. That constant juggling act students face balancing studies, maybe a job, extracurriculars, trying to have some kind of personal life.
It's universal, isn't it? You mentioned students in Canada often working part-time. It teaches good skills, sure, but wow, it demands serious time allocation and prioritization if you don't want your studies to slip.
This balancing act is definitely fodder for writing tasks. Analyzing the importance of time management, suggesting strategies, using planners, setting goals, maybe avoiding the trap of trying to multitask everything, which often just reduces focus and efficiency.
And it's great material for speaking part 2. If the topic is describing a challenge you overcame, talking about learning to manage coursework and a job effectively by using a planner, setting priorities, that's a strong, relatable story. Uses phrases like time allocation, prioritization, efficiency naturally.
And it's important to remember, these challenges, while tough, are also part of the learning process, aren't they?
Yeah.
Overcoming them builds resilience, independence, practical skills that are valuable long after graduation.
Absolutely. And a lot of that broader development, those other skills, happen outside the formal classroom. Which brings us neatly to our next section. Beyond the books, the value of extracurricular activities.
Right. Activities like sports, clubs, volunteering, they really complement academic learning in important ways. They offer different settings to develop skills like leadership, teamwork, communication, creativity, things that are highly valued everywhere.
Let's start with sports. The benefits seem pretty clear, right? Better physical fitness, developing discipline, perseverance. And if it's a team sport, soccer, basketball, whatever, learning collaboration and team spirit.
Yeah, and a simple speaking part 1 question might be, did you play any sports at school? You could talk about playing volleyball, maybe saying it wasn't just about winning, but about learning teamwork and how it was a great way to de-stress during exam periods.
Listening tasks could easily feature students talking about joining university sports clubs. You'd need to listen for details about practice times, fees, maybe the availability of campus facilities like gyms or playing fields. So vocabulary like physical fitness, team spirit, competitive sports is useful.
Okay, moving on to clubs and societies. These are fantastic environments for developing communication and leadership skills, often in a less formal way than in class. Joining a debate club sharpens your public speaking. A drama society fosters creativity and collaboration. An environmental group encourages community involvement and organizational skills.
They offer practical experience, let students explore interests. You might read passages discussing how universities view extracurricular engagement during admissions, or about how student societies are funded. A speaking task might ask if you could join any club at university, what would it be and why?
And you could respond by describing, say, wanting to join an environmental club because you're passionate about sustainability. You could explain how it would allow you to collaborate with others, develop your own leadership development skills by organizing events, and engage in positive community involvement. See how those terms fit.
Perfectly. Then there's volunteering and community service. Activities like tutoring younger kids, helping at a local charity, participating in neighborhood cleanups. These really foster empathy, social responsibility, a sense of civic duty.
This often sparks a debate in writing task 2. Should community service be mandatory for school students? Now you need a balanced view. Argue that making it compulsory could ensure all students experience giving back, instilling civic values, but also acknowledge the counterpoint. Does forcing it undermine the spirit of volunteerism? Does it become just another chore?
A good essay point could be arguing for mandatory service as a way to teach responsibility, but stressing that students should have some choice in what they do to ensure it feels meaningful and has a genuine social impact for them.
It's worth remembering, though, that while all these activities are great, there's a risk of overcommitment. Taking on too much outside class can lead straight back to those time management issues we talked about.
Absolutely. It's a balancing act. In a speaking discussion about managing time, you could even share a personal anecdote, maybe about joining too many clubs initially, seeing grades dip, and then learning the hard way about prioritization and strategic time allocation. Sometimes less is more, right?
Definitely. So these activities clearly add huge value to a student's overall growth, providing skills and experiences that are different from, but just as crucial as, academic learning.
And speaking of things that are transforming education, we have to talk about technology. Its impact has been enormous, hasn't it? Changing how we teach, learn, access information, bringing amazing opportunities, but also new challenges.
Without a doubt. The most obvious change is the explosion of online learning. Platforms like Zoom for classes, resources like Khan Academy, university online portals, they offer incredible flexibility and accessibility. You can learn practically anything from anywhere, often setting your own pace.
The shift during the COVID-19 pandemic really threw this into high gear, didn't it? It was like a massive global experiment. It showed the advantages of continuity of learning during lockdowns, global access to lectures, but it also really highlighted the limitations, the lack of face-to-face interaction, challenges keeping students engaged online, worries about fair assessment, and of course the digital divide.
Which makes that question, does online learning outperform traditional classroom education? So relevant for writing task 2. An essay on this needs balance. Explore the pros. Self-paced learning, often lower cost, location independence. But you must also tackle the cons. Less social interaction, potential tech problems, and crucially, how it can worsen inequality if students lack reliable internet or devices that digital divide. A strong conclusion might suggest that hybrid models, blending online and face-to-face elements, could be the most effective way forward.
Key terms there: e-learning, virtual classrooms, digital accessibility, and that crucial one, digital divide.
And it's not just about moving classes online. Technology has brought new educational technology tools into the classroom itself. Interactive whiteboards replacing chalkboards, AI tutors offering personalized practice, learning management systems like Moodle or Blackboard, changing how assignments and grades are handled.
Right. You might hear discussions about these tools in listening tasks or read analyses of their effectiveness, so knowing terms like educational technology, interactive learning, digital tools is helpful.
But technology isn't a magic bullet. There are potential downsides. Is there a risk of over-reliance? Could easy online searches reduce deep critical thinking if not managed well?
And that digital divide issue keeps coming back. Unequal access to tech and the internet creates a huge barrier for some students, potentially making educational inequality even worse.
Writing tasks might ask for solutions. You could propose government subsidies for devices or internet for low-income families, or investing in teacher training on digital pedagogy, how to actually use tech effectively and equitably in teaching.
In speaking, if asked how tech changed education in your country, you could mention expanded access via online platforms, but maybe point out that rural students often struggled with poor connectivity, stressing the need to improve digital accessibility for everyone.
And looking further ahead, the potential impact of things like virtual reality, VR, and artificial intelligence, AI, is just massive.
Yeah, VR could offer incredible immersive learning. Imagine history students walking through ancient Rome virtually, or medical students practicing surgery in a simulation.
And AI could personalize learning massively. Adaptive assessments that adjust to your level, AI tutors offering tailored support. You're starting to see reading passages exploring these future trends, so terms like adaptive technology, immersive learning, digital transformation are good to know.
It's clear tech isn't just changing how we deliver education, it's changing the very nature of learning itself.
And as we talk about all these different systems, challenges, and the impact of global forces like tech, it's so important to maintain a global perspective. Understanding different cultural approaches is really key, especially for something like IELTS.
This is where comparing different national systems gets really interesting. Take the common comparison. Western systems, like the US or UK, often seen as prioritizing creativity, critical thinking, maybe more student autonomy, versus some Eastern systems, maybe China or India, traditionally emphasizing discipline, memorization, sometimes called rote learning, and performance in high-stakes exams.
And this philosophical difference often leads to debates which approach is better. For a writing task 2 on this, you could argue the Western model might foster more innovation and independent thought, while the Eastern model might be credited with producing strong, consistent results in standardized tests and instilling a powerful work ethic through discipline and practice?
A really good answer often suggests a hybrid approach might be best combining the strengths of both, fostering creativity and ensuring a solid knowledge base and discipline, using terms like student-centered learning, acknowledging cultural influences, and understanding rote learning is important here.
Another vital global perspective is inequality. Big disparities in educational access and quality still exist based on income, gender, where you live. It's a huge global challenge.
Reading passages often discuss initiatives by organizations like UNESCO, like Education for All, aiming for educational equity or promoting gender equity. You might need to identify causes like poverty or discrimination and understand solutions like scholarships or building schools, specific policy interventions.
In speaking, if asked about the government's role in reducing inequality, you could give concrete examples from your context, maybe free textbook programs or efforts to improve schools in rural areas. This uses vocabulary around the access gap, socioeconomic barriers, and policy intervention.
And the experience of international students is a massive part of this global picture, too. Millions study abroad every year. It's amazing for cultural exchange, gaining global perspectives.
But it comes with challenges, too, right? Navigating visa rules, language issues, and that significant cultural adjustment.
Describing studying abroad is a very common Speaking Part 2 topic. You could talk about a friend's experience, the initial struggles adapting to a new system or language, the adaptation challenges and how they grew from it, gaining confidence and global competencies.
Great example. Uses terms like cultural exchange, global mobility, cultural adjustment, adaptation challenges very naturally.
Finally, globalization itself shapes education. You see standardization like the IB or Cambridge curricula being adopted worldwide,
which can help with global mobility and provides a recognized standardized curriculum.
Yeah.
But it also raises worries about cultural erosion. Could local traditions or history get sidelined for a more generic global approach? Writing tasks might explore this tension between standardization and preserving cultural identity. We'd use terms like standardized curriculum, cultural identity, global competencies. Understanding these global dimensions isn't just academic. It helps you engage with the complexity of education worldwide and gives you so much more to talk about.
Exactly. And bringing this all back home, so to speak, everything we've discussed is aimed at boosting your readiness for assessments like IELTS.
Right.
So this final section is about leveraging this deep dive for your prep.
Right. First things first, vocabulary. Building your specific word bank for this topic is crucial. We've thrown a lot of terms around. It helps to group them. Think about categories like education systems, words like curriculum, syllabus, assessment criteria, educational reform, challenges, mental health support, exam stress, financial strain, social integration, academic workload, extracurriculars, holistic development, leadership skills, community engagement, team spirit, technology, digital literacy, e-learning, virtual classrooms, technological disparity, digital divide, and global perspectives, cultural diversity, educational equity, access gap, policy intervention, globalization, cultural adjustment.
And the key is not just listing them, right? It's practicing using them, weaving them into practice sentences, paragraphs, spoken answers. The more you actively use them, the more naturally they'll come out when you need them. It really boosts that lexical resource score.
Definitely. For writing task 2, really review those common question types we mentioned: free education, text role, measuring success, comparing systems. Practice structuring your essays logically. Clear introduction, body paragraphs exploring different sides or causes solutions, and a solid conclusion.
And don't forget those linking words. Using things like furthermore, conversely, consequently, in conclusion helps your argument flow. Varying your sentence structures, using some short, some long, and complex also makes your writing more sophisticated.
For speaking, practice answering those typical questions. Your own school days, favorite subjects, exam prep, studying abroad.
Get comfortable talking about these things. Practice out loud, maybe even record yourself. Work on pronunciation, making your ideas flow coherently. Use natural fillers sparingly if you need to pause, but aim for fluency. Maybe even try incorporating a couple of relevant idioms like hit the books or learn the ropes if it feels natural can make you sound more idiomatic.
With reading and listening, focus your practice on education-themed materials. For reading, practice skimming articles about policy or research to get the main idea quickly. Then practice scanning for specific details, names, dates, stats.
For listening, find practice audio like university lectures, campus announcements, student conversations about courses or accommodation. Focus on catching key info, understanding opinions, maybe identifying what's implied but not directly stated.
Here's a concrete practice idea. Find a short reading passage on Say, educational inequality, maybe 300 words. Try to summarize its main points accurately in just 50 words. Force yourself to use key terms like access gap or policy intervention. It really sharpens comprehension and summary skills.
And lastly, time management. It's always critical in time tests. Practice writing essays within the 40 minutes. Practice structuring your speaking answers to fit the time limits, especially that 1-2-minute part 2 talk. Practice moving through reading and listening sections efficiently. Use a timer. Get used to that clock ticking.
It really comes down to focused preparation on these themes, building that vocabulary, and actively practicing the specific task types using the language and insights we've covered. That's what builds confidence.
So we've certainly covered a lot of ground today. We've gone from the basic structures of education systems through all the challenges students face globally to the value of learning outside the classroom, the huge impact of technology, and why that global perspective is so vital.
And understanding all these different facets, it really does more than just prepare you for a test. It genuinely equips you to talk about this incredibly important part of life with more depth and clarity. You become more knowledgeable, more articulate.
It really does shape individuals and societies. Which leads to a final thought for you, our listener, to ponder as we finish up. Considering how fast technology is changing everything, especially learning, what do you think the classroom of the future will actually look like? Or maybe, what will it feel like? How might the whole experience of school change in the years ahead?
That's a great question to mull over. Lots to think about there.
We really hope this deep dive has been useful for you, providing some valuable insights and tools.
Thanks for tuning in.
If you found this deep dive helpful, please remember to like, share, and subscribe to this YouTube channel. We look forward to our next exploration together.